Amir, how are you?
I'm
Co-founder and
good.
CEO of Helium. Welcome.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Uh,
Good to be
so
back.
let's start from the top. What is Helium?
Helium is it's an economic system for building wireless networks. That's the best answer that I can usually come up with. Today, the sort of first instantiation of that idea is an IoT network. Like when we started Helium a long time ago, back when I think you first met us, Matt, in 2013. We believed that IoT was sort of the worst solved problem in telecom. Like there were no solutions for connecting devices to the internet that were small and battery powered and needed to be cheap. And so our focus for the longest time has been on solving that problem. Like how do you build a big ubiquitous sort of global scale IoT network? We took lots of different attempts to try and solve that problem, as you know, as you well know. It was not all up and to the right. It was a very twisty road that often went left and downwards and went all over the place. And that's, I think crypto for us, and as Kyle mentioned, we had the sort of light bulb moment somewhere in 2016 or 2017, where we realized that you could sort of empower just people, whether they were individuals or small businesses or even large businesses, to participate in the telecom industry and use crypto as a way to sort of organize that. And so Helium is really that, right? Like it's the economic system that allows individuals to participate in a global telecom network. And the first instantiation is IoT, but it certainly is not the last. And we've moved already into 5G and cellular. And there will be all sorts of other ventures in that direction as well, whether they are Wi-Fi or fixed wireless or whatever other future version. But it's really that. It's like enable people to coordinate at a global scale to build wireless networks.
Yeah, and at a very practical level for anyone that has heard about Helium but actually doesn't really know what this is. Do you want to talk about just the mechanics, leaving aside the tokens, but like there's a supply side and there's a demand side, and the supply side does what? If you could get into the hotspots and all the things, that would be great.
This is one of those like things that you're not supposed to do at startups, right? Like you're not supposed to do the build it and they will come approach, but crypto allows us to take that approach, and so we did. And the way we chose to solve it was to say, like, okay, we have to build a supply side out first, and the supply side in our case is network coverage, right? And so today, when you have a cell phone, you walk outside, or you don't even need to walk outside. Inside, you have coverage kind of everywhere with cell phones, and we wanted to build the equivalent of that for IoT devices, so sensors and small things. The solution there for us was to create a device called a hotspot. And the hotspot in our case is a sort of combination of a crypto miner and a wireless access point for IoT devices. So it uses a wireless network protocol called LoRaWAN, designed for very low power things over very long ranges, very low data rates. So you're not streaming video or anything like that. You're just sending relatively simple messages like GPS location or something like that. And so the thing that I think was special about what we did with Helium is that we made it very simple to do two things that were otherwise quite complicated to do for consumers. Really all you have to do as a consumer is just get a hotspot, plug it in, use a phone app to set it up, which is sort of a similar experience to like any consumer electronic device you might buy. And that's it. And that's your participation process. And I think making it that simple and that easy has caused the network to explode. It's like 600,000 hotspots now. It's like 3.5 million that are back ordered. It's in thousands of cities, hundreds of countries. So it's really sort of taken off in this way. I think because we've enabled pretty much anyone to participate in this world.
Do you want to talk about the other side of the network and the emerging use cases that you've seen?
Yeah, and the demand side has always been the slow part of the equation, right? Like unlike in software where it is relatively straightforward or certainly not as time consuming and from an overall sort of start to finish point of view to build applications, hardware is like much more arduous, right? Like you've got to build a prototype, you've got to like figure out how to manufacture it. Like every iteration of like the hardware takes weeks or months. And so everything about that process is slow. And so the bet was always with Helium was always that if we built the network, that the use cases would appear, basically, which I know sounds kind of insane from a normal business point of view. But our experience over the years had led us to believe that the use cases existed, and there were lots of them. There was just no way to deploy them, right? It's almost like if you had the idea for an iPhone app, but the only phone you had was like a Nokia flip phone. Like there was no way for you to make it occur. And so we're starting to see that now appear. Like the demand is coming, and some of the use cases are super interesting. And we've announced some of them, and we haven't announced some of them. But whether it's things like delivering packages via drones that need coordination, or whether it's like connected mousetraps or GPS tracking devices, which I think was always the most sort of obvious application for things like logistics and pharmaceuticals and everything else. Wildfire sensors, there's a very, very broad range. We're starting to see them sort of appear now, whether they are from bigger corporations that already had the idea, or whether they're from startups or individuals and entrepreneurs that are sort of coming up with new ideas. But that's exciting. To me, that's the most exciting part, is to actually see like the applications start to form and take advantage of the coverage network that exists.
You built your own blockchain, right? I think I heard or read somewhere that if Solana existed, you might have used that as a core blockchain, but you built your own layer one blockchain. Do you want to talk about why and how, and then maybe go into how it actually works, including proof of coverage, proof of location, the whole consensus mechanism at a more technical level?
At the time that we conceived the crypto version of Helium, which was sort of 16, 17 kind of time frame, Ethereum was really the only way that you would feasibly build something like Helium. We already thought that was going to be a problem. Like gas prices were already quite high. We knew that the number of transactions was going to be significant in a network like Helium. And so we weren't sure how to proceed, like whether you would have some kind of state channel implementation, or whether you would try and roll up, as many transactions as you could, sort of the way that a lot of the Ethereum layer 2s work today. And the other thing people were doing was forking Bitcoin. And so the Helium blockchain is a layer one. It's a proof of stake network where there are validators who are responsible for transaction validation and block production. Uses a consensus protocol called Honey Badger BFT. And so, BFT is the Byzantine fault tolerant sort of world of consensus protocols, and the Honey Badger version of it is a asynchronous version that doesn't really care about latency. When we thought that was it, we thought that was important at the time. Unclear if it's still super important as the networks evolved. And so the validator group, there's about 3,500 validators. About a third of the entire HNT supply is staked. So it's proof of stake blockchain like most, and so you have to stake 10,000 HNT to become a validator. There's about $1 billion worth of HNT staked in all these validators today. And the rest of the network uses something called proof of coverage to figure out who to reward, right? So one part of the system is creating blocks and validating transactions, and that looks just like any other blockchain for the most part. But the other, in our case, was like, what are we trying to do with the Helium network? And really the thing that was special for us was rewarding people for building the network coverage before there was usage for it. Proof of coverage is designed that way. It's quite detailed in terms of how it works and quite complicated. But the gist of it is, that the longer your coverage, the longer range, the better your coverage area, the more HNT you earn.
Let's talk about the tokens and how it all works with tokenomics. So there are HNTs, there are HSTs, there's the concept of data credit. How does that all work?
So the main token is HNT. So that's sort of the native token. That's what hotspot owners earn. It's what validators earn. It's what's used for staking. The purpose of HNT is to be able to create data credits, which is the second token in the Helium ecosystem. And data credits are, you can kind of think of them as a stable coin inside of Helium, and they are similar to something like a cell phone minute or an airline mile or like something like that. It's utilitarian in purpose. It allows you to transfer 24 bytes of data over the Helium network wirelessly, and that's all you can do with it. You can't trade it. There's no speculative value to it. You literally can't even transfer them. Right? The only thing you can do with them is destroy them to pay for traffic. We like that system. It was actually influenced heavily by Kyle and the Multicoin team when we first met. And we like that system a lot because it gives predictability to end users, right? The value of data credits is always the same. And so if you're a user of the network building sensors, you know exactly how much it's going to cost to use the network at all times, regardless what the value of HNT is, which is fluctuating around. And so you can only create data credits by destroying HNT. That's sort of they call this the burn and mint equilibrium. So you are destroying HNT in order to create data credits. And the ratio changes based on the value of HNT, right? So data credits are fixed in value and HNT is fluctuating in value. So that system works really, really well because it, as I said, it gives very predictable outcomes for users of the network, and no one has to second guess, what the price of using the network is, which I think is a problem in systems like Filecoin and others that have a single token. The third token is not that relevant for users, other than it being kind of an interesting founders reward system. So we have a third token called HST, and we sort of modeled this a little bit after Zcash. Zcash was the only system that we knew of that was rewarding the founding team and its investors over time rather than in a pre-mine, right? So most blockchain networks will create, all of the tokens up front, and they will allocate, a percentage of them to the founding team and its investors. So, but that's basically the three sets of tokens: HST, HNT, and data credits.
Great. And to start weaving in some questions from the groups, a question from Nitesh about effectively how you see the incentives evolving. So incentives were the key to scale the Helium network, but it was growing device numbers and lower rewards. How do you conceive of incentives going down when we need to keep scaling the network?
It's a good question. I think part of what happens in crypto is that people become desensitized to normal rewards. Or normal ROIs. And that's a little bit of a messaging challenge. Early hotspot hosts, by today's HNT value, made an absurd amount of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars in some case for the earliest miners. And I think that sort of distorted what acceptable ROIs and acceptable rewards look like, right? And so as far as I understand, like HNT mining is still like one of the most, high ROI like miners that you can that you can participate in. Uses no power, has like no real running cost. So I think to me, it feels like we're still far away from that problem, but there is a sort of expectation issue, right? There's a gap between, 50% APR being good and people being upset, right? And that's, I'm not sure that we've bridged that perfectly, or that the community as a whole has sort of been able to sort of bridge that properly. But there's a few things going on that will help over time. Like hotspots are going to get cheaper over time. Like I think this is a really bad period of time for anything to do with hardware and manufacturing over this COVID period. There's an upgrade to the network called HIP 55, which will cause the hardware requirements of hotspots to go down significantly. So it will be much, much cheaper to manufacture and produce hotspots. So all of that changes the sort of ROI calculation or the incentive calculation there, right? But I do think there are going to be a constituent of earlier users that have made all their money and now sort of start to cycle out of the system. And that's perfectly normal and perfectly expected.
While we are talking about the tokens, do you want to talk about the decentralization aspect of this? Or for example, you mentioned the hardware and the requirement for the hotspots.
Yeah, there's something like 65 different hotspot manufacturers now. So we built them originally not because we wanted to be a hardware manufacturer or we wanted to make money. And I think a lot of people looking at Helium mistakenly think that Helium, the company, earns anything from hotspot sales. Like people often say like, oh, there's a licensing fee, like Helium Inc. doesn't care. They're just, interested in selling hotspots. We actually make nothing from any hotspot sales. Like there's no licensing, there's no nothing. And so for us, building the first hotspots was important because it sort of allowed us to create the user experience that we thought mattered the most. We've sent like everything from that has been open sourced and handed off to third parties. So the hotspot ecosystem is as decentralized as it could be. Like we actually, as a company, have no interaction with the vendors other than to sort of assist with technical questions and technical problems over time. Other parts of the ecosystem are similarly decentralized. Like up until very, very recently, the company, for example, didn't run any validators. So there are now 3,500 validators. 3,300 of them are nothing to do with us. They're members of the community and other people that have bought HNT or participated in the ecosystem. So it's heading in the right direction. I think what's hard about the decentralization story with blockchains is really the core engineering that needs to happen. And you kind of see this with Bitcoin and others where there's always like relatively like small group that are skilled enough to sort of participate in that in the sort of engineering. And so I would love to see that grow in a more decentralized way and like have more input from the community from an engineering point of view. But as far as hotspots and validators and users have gone, like I'm really happy with like how distributed that is and how little part the company really plays in any of that anymore.
Great. What about governance? And you mentioned HIP. What is it? How does the community impact the development of Helium?
So there's a process that we borrowed from Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has a thing called Bitcoin improvement proposals, which are BIPs, and we have Helium improvement proposals, which are HIPs. And anyone can submit a HIP. So nearly all of the changes on the Helium network have come from proposals from the community and not from the company itself. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, they are community driven. And so someone from the community writes the proposal. It gets voted on by the community, and it's sort of a HNT weighted vote. Recently, I think the network is sort of to the point where these HIPs now have to really come with code. You know, like I think we were getting to the point where people were writing like extravagant and often very, very good proposals for like how to improve the network, but there was no one to actually like do the engineering work. So the expectation now is if you want to submit an improvement proposal, it needs to come with the like, you know, the code that comes with it. And that's similar to the way Bitcoin and Ethereum and other networks do it, is like, here's the change I want to make. And then there's sort of a debate and discussion and a very active process. And then people end up voting on it, and either it's accepted or rejected.
Great. I'm looking, there's a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm going to try and sort of group them thematically. So we were talking about tokens just a minute ago. So let me take this one from Chris. How did you navigate whether or not HNT and HST was considered a security by the SEC?
The trap question. Yeah, candidly, I wish there were sort of clearer guidance on how to proceed in some of these, but I think we were very careful about the token design here, and we never sold any HNT. There was no pre-mine of HNT, so I think we did as much as could be done to ensure that we were on the right side of the regulations there. Question
from Keith: when can we get delegated staking? And please, I mean, really, 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 please.
Yeah, so the question here, just as, for context, is right now you have to stake 10,000 HNT to participate as a validator, and that's, today is like $250,000, and at times it was even more than that. So there are like third-party vendors in the ecosystem where you can stake much smaller amounts. You can stake 100 HNT, for example, but the downside is that you have to trust the vendor. And so I would love to see delegated. I would love to see partial staking on chain, and I think it's just one of these things where there are more pressing concerns, I think, ahead of us. And so far, the ecosystem of third-party vendors seems to have been trustworthy and good. So I would recommend that for the time being.
A question from David: will you please speak to the recent vote to undergo a 1000x redenomination?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I do think there is, what people call unit bias in the crypto world, right? Where I've had hotspot miners directly tell me that I would rather earn 1,000 HNT that was worth nothing than 1 HNT that was worth $100. And so there's something strange that goes on mentally, where I think people like large amounts and they can sort of conceive of them being highly valuable in the future. So that's, to me, that's where that idea came from, was, someone proposed that redenominating HNT, it passed, and I think it's going to happen later in the year. It just again hasn't been a priority for us to implement in the near term, but as far as I know, it's still coming later.
Great. So there's various questions around the general theme of like, where is this all going? So question from Samuel, for example: relatively speaking, where do you envision the Helium ecosystem will be in 2 years? And then 5 years? Do you need to cover everything? Yeah. How many hotspots is that going to be? And then as a separate question, and like one or two others ask as well, what is the timing for 5G?
So I'll answer the 5G stuff first. So, the hardware for it exists, and it works and it functions, and, you can buy a 5G hotspot today. I think Gig Sky is the first MVNO that is using the Helium network. So, you can be a Gig Sky subscriber and participate in the Helium network already. I think really the question is like, when do I start earning proof of coverage rewards for 5G, or when do I start earning rewards in general for 5G? And I think I would be hopeful that that's this year. We're working with the Freedom Fi team on a regular basis, thinking through that. And there's various proposals in the community. Again, I think there's like HIP 37 and 51 and 52 and 53. So there's lots of different suggestions here in the community about how to implement rewards and like how to enable mining in the 5G universe. So I'm optimistic that the network is on the right path. In terms of some of the other questions about LoRa and where will Helium be in 2 years, 5 years? Like I think it's entirely feasible in the next 2 to 3 years that Helium is the largest cellular network in the United States. And I've said this before, and I think lots of people in the industry think I'm crazy. But it's entirely possible that that's true. I mean, if you look at the size of something like Verizon or T-Mobile, like their cell networks are something like 100,000 towers in the entire of the US, and there are already 600,000 hotspots with another 3 million coming. So if you see anything like that kind of success in the cellular or in the 5G world, then it's entirely feasible that Helium gets to kind of a size where it is sort of the dominant network, cellular network in the US in terms of coverage. I'm excited about cellular, especially. I think it's, the demand side is obviously solved relative to IoT. Like we know what the predominant use case is for cellular networks, where that's not necessarily true in IoT yet. And now the problem is just building the network out and making sure that the incentive is correct in the same way it was for the IoT network. And I think we're on the right path for both of those things.
Question from Benjamin: as Helium grows and launches a 5G mobile service, what makes you think that internet service providers will not cut off Helium devices from the network?
I think it's probably the most common question that I get asked, and I continue to just view that as not a thing that is likely to happen. And to me, it doesn't feel any different from I'm using my home internet connection right now to conduct Helium Inc. business as I'm talking to you. I don't think that violates any terms of service that I'm aware of, but I'm conducting business and I'm earning money. So I don't. To me, they are one and the same. And in general, people need to look at their own terms of service and make sure that they're not doing anything they shouldn't be doing. But on the whole, like that's not an issue that really ever concerned me. Just a couple more questions from Spencer. How does the rest of the telecom industry view Helium? I would imagine that mostly they're intrigued at this point. We have good relationships with some of the carriers. We announced with Dish recently, and we work with other carriers on the LoRa side. So certainly everyone is, I think, some combination of impressed and intrigued. I think there are a whole group of people that still think Helium is a Ponzi scheme and crypto is a joke and whatever. And I look forward to seeing their reaction over the next few years. So what are the different ways one could get involved at Helium? So there's the mining, there's like buying the tokens. There is a question around, if you're an entrepreneur and wanted to build something on top of the network, what would be interesting from your perspective? It's pretty broad. If you go to helium.com/ecosystem, I think that probably gives the best sort of view of like the different kinds of entities that participate. But as you said, it's typically either hosting a hotspot, buying HNT. You can operate a validator. Those things I think are always going to be high value and useful to the network. But what I'm personally the most interested in seeing nowadays is applications and use cases that people build. So, if you go to helium.com/use, it's kind of helpful guide there on how to get started. There's lots and lots of cheap development kits available. I don't know. I mean, in terms of use cases, I get asked that question a lot too. And yeah, I don't know. Like I'm constantly like shocked at some of the things that I've seen. And I think that's the best place to be. And again, it reminds me a little bit of the iPhone. Could never have predicted some of the applications that now exist on the iPhone. And I can't predict the Helium applications either, other than thinking that they're awesome when I see them. So that's to me the thing that I'm always the most interested in is what people build and seeing makers and entrepreneurs coming up with new products and ideas that use Helium is to me one of the most exciting things about the network.
Very cool. Well, it's been an incredible journey, and in some ways it feels like Helium is just getting started. And I guess we are, I know for a fact we're all incredibly excited about the potential and what's in store for the network. So congratulations on everything you've built. It's been incredible to watch and so excited for the future. And thank you very much for coming to speak at this event. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And thanks for having me.